Ann likes watching her pennies too, saving her pennies, don't you, Ann?
Queen of frugality.
Ann says she's the queen of frugality, so me too, I'm with you. When you got a kid in college, you gotta be. So I'm throwing a little olive oil in the bottom of a big old soup pan. And when I like to make soup, I like to do it in the biggest pan you have, otherwise your whole kitchen will be wearing the soup. And like I said, this makes a nice big batch. So I'm adding to the soup pan some diced onion, about a cup of diced onion, and a cup of diced carrot. And most of my soup recipes, I'm trying to think, just the majority of them, start with onion, carrot, and this one has some celery in it too. It's just a great, you know, and those are things you probably already have in your pantry right now. So I'm just going to dice this up. Soup makes the house smell so good, and after a long day, it's just kind of like a hug in a bowl. And if you are watching what you eat, making a healthy soup is a great way to do that because it fills you up. It's very satisfying and warms you up at the same time. So when I'm watching it, I love making a healthy soup. So I want those to cook for a few minutes to kind of soften up. I'm going to season with some salt and pepper. Real important when it comes to making soups to season as you go, not just throw in a little salt and pepper at the end. It's not quite going to do it. So I mentioned this is an Italian bean soup. And most times, especially when they go on sale, you can find, I'm using the Great Northern, which are usually cheaper than an Italian bean called the cannellini bean. Those are a little bit more pricey. So, you know, I say, you know, there's not much difference. So in this soup, if you're trying to save some money, use the Great Northern beans. And these, sometimes you can find them for less than $1 a can. So when they go on sale, I always try to keep a stocked pantry with things like canned tomatoes and beans, things that are everyday staples that you don't have to run out to the grocery store and get. When you see them on sale, pick some up. So this recipe calls for 3 cans of Great Northern beans. Very inexpensive, and beans are super good for you. So I'm trying to put beans in more and more recipes. Really good for you, filling, and cheap. So they've got everything good going on here. And once you start putting beans in more and more recipes, the kids are less and less likely to start picking them out. I remember when I first made chili with beans, my kids would pick every little last bean out of the chili, and now they're cool with it. So I just kept putting them in there, and at one point they stopped picking them out. So it worked. Checking on my onions and my celery. Now I'm using some zucchini and some summer squash in this soup. If you just have zucchini, that would be great too. This is a great way to throw some extra vegetables in here, and I love zucchini. But you notice I started the onion and the celery and the carrot first. Those take longer to cook, and I don't want to be left with mushy zucchini. I think that's where zucchini gets a bad rap. So I'm going to saute that after I start the onions, carrots, and celery. I had a soup similar to this at an Italian restaurant recently, and I was like, you know what? That would be a really easy soup to make at home. And I love doing that, going to a restaurant and saying, you know what, I could do that at home. So I think I'm going to do my zucchini, and it's up to you how you want to do this, in kind of half moons, but the summer squash is a little bit bigger, so I might dice that up a little bit, which is fine. We'll have a couple of different textures going on. And I try and, like, when I go to the grocery store, let the vegetables dictate, you know, what I'm going to be making. If the summer squash wasn't in season, they didn't have it, or it didn't look very good, just go with all zucchini. And when I am picking out zucchini, I like to go for the smaller or the medium. I don't like to go the real large zucchini. I find that to be a little bit bitter. Okay, so our onions, carrots, and celery are starting to sweat down a little bit. At this point, I'm going to add just a touch more olive oil. And I'm going to throw in my zucchini and my summer squash. A little more salt and pepper. As I said, I like to season as we go. And I'm going to do some Italian seasoning. Dried basil and oregano, or if you just have a dried Italian seasoning, that would work too. And I like to throw that in while the veggies are cooking, rather than just dumping them in the liquid. This warms them up, kind of brings those spices back to life. This is a big pot of soup. I don't want to skimp on the seasoning. I also have some fresh garlic, 3 or 4 cloves of fresh garlic. I think we've all had that batch of soup that just didn't have a lot of flavor. It was kind of watery, and that's no good. So this is going to have although it's going to be fresh and very inexpensive to make, it's going to have a lot of flavor with the garlic and the Italian seasoning. Just going to give that garlic a rough chop. Doesn't have to be perfect because it is going into a soup. Every little last bit of that in there. And when I get the garlic in there, you know the rules, about 30 seconds with fresh garlic, get it going. And once you can start smelling it, we're good to go, and we need to start adding the rest of the ingredients because I don't want to burn that wonderful fresh garlic. So in goes some tomato sauce, chicken stock, or vegetable stock if you wanted to keep this vegetarian. I always start with a couple cups of stock, and I can always add more. Just depends on how thick and hearty you want it. So we'll start with that, and we've got some extra stock. That's why I love buying the stock in the box, because you can just add what you need when you need it. 1 can of diced tomatoes, and we can throw the juice right in there. So we've got the tomato sauce, which is going to, you know, give it a little bit of body, and then the diced tomatoes. If your kids are not a fan of diced tomatoes, you could just do crushed tomatoes. So tomato sauce and the crushed tomatoes, and that's a way to make the soup not as chunky with those chunks of tomatoes in there. All right, so I'm going to let that come to a simmer, and I am going to drain and rinse the beans. One thing, I like using beans in a lot of recipes, but in most cases, it's a really good idea to drain and rinse these beans. There's a liquid in the beans that's just not really great in most recipes. Also gets rid of some of the sodium in here. And I just do it in the kitchen colander. And then these cans are now all ready for the recycling bin. Just run some water over them. And then drain them really well. All right, in goes our beans. The soup is almost to the finish line. So I'm just going to let this simmer for a little bit. This is a pretty quick cook, so 5 to 10 minutes simmering, and then we're going to finish this with a little bit of Parmesan cheese. So I think right now we'll take a break, let this come to a simmer, and then I'll show you how to finish this delicious, very hearty, healthy, but super cheap to make Italian bean soup. So stay with us. Lots more inexpensive ideas and recipes still ahead. We'll be back.